Welcome to Biztech's Community Conversation Show. Our guest for today is Terence Ooi. He's the co-founder of Wiki Impact. Wiki Impact is an online platform dedicated to the impact industry. The platform shares stories and data on issues that matter, highlighting impact-driven organizations and change givers and makers on the ground. Now, to tell us more about Wiki Impact and what it was set up to do, welcome to the show, Terence.
Thank you, Brian. Such an honor to be here.
Now, Terence, for a start, give us a snapshot of Wiki Impact. What did you and your co-founders start this platform for?
Yeah, so Brian, just to give you a bit of quick history, the three co-founders, we actually have on the ground, on the field experience when it comes to social work. So whether involved in education, food bank, charities, and so on. But one thing we realized over in Malaysia is that there is this lack of data to help us to make more informed decisions. And, you know, during COVID, you tend to work from home, you tend to think a bit more, you tend to pull out ideas from shelves that you've kept. And so then we talked about it, we put together this idea, and Wiki Impact was birthed initially was to really provide data and stories about issues that matters to Malaysians, especially during the pandemic. Then slowly we had quote unquote demand for people were coming to us and say, hey, how can I help? Where can I volunteer? Are there jobs within the social impact space that I can be involved in? And our version 2 of the site then evolved to not just providing data, but also providing space for change makers to publish jobs, news, events, experiences to the public, so that it's like a one-stop shop to find all things impact in our country.
Okay, so give us an idea of, organizations like you don't work in silos. Who are your partners and collaborators?
So we work generally with this term called change makers, and what defines change makers would be really anyone on the ground creating change. This comes from, you mentioned the NGOs, the foundations, but also student movements, student bodies, faith-based organizations who are also creating change. So there is no color, no creed, or no race, right, when it comes to this. So this constitutes everything that we provide coverage for on Wiki Impact.
Okay, and where do your funds come from? How are you funded as an organization?
So we are self-funded by co-founder, right? That's the one. Second, we are also providing impact storytelling services to different organizations, change makers on the ground. So they pay us to cover their stories, whether is it bite-sized stories on social media or stories about their beneficiaries. So we do provide that services to our clients as well. And the third one would also be we provide data coverage for different social issues that a particular organization is, say, passionate about or wants more research or data. So, for instance, let's say financial institutions would approach us and inquire, say, hey, I would like to know more about, say, the climate crisis or or environmental issues within a certain sphere. So, guys like us, Wiki Impact, we would then provide a research proposal to them, and then if it's agreeable, then we'll go down that route of providing such services.
Okay, you were founded in August 2020. You've published 11 white papers and you've produced over 500 pieces of content. Now, could you, for the benefit of our listeners, elaborate on some of the work that you've actually done? You did allude to it broadly, but perhaps you can zoom in on some examples.
Sure. So initially, we wanted to cover mainly on the issue of poverty. Right. So, I mean, because that was exacerbated by the pandemic. So that was the main driver for our coverage, poverty. But increasingly over the last couple of months, we have been covering issues like environmental. And I think that the main subject for today would also be about corporate philanthropy. And that was something that, we produced and published too.
Okay. And I'm going to come back to the corporate philanthropy and that report shortly.
Yeah.
But when you do these studies and white papers, do you collaborate as with stakeholders like universities or government bodies?
Good question. So our initial starting point was really to go into the government data portal, right? So everything is sort of like hidden and in stacks of Excel sheets. So our researchers, our writers will go through them and pull this data out to make big data, I would say, like consumable by laymen like you and I, right? So that was our initial starting point. And obviously, there are certain data that are not available on such portals. So we do approach NGOs, for example, like a nonprofit who is involved in homeless work for, let's say, 20 years. We will go up to them, we will ask them, hey, you know, actually, how many homeless people are on the streets and what kind of demographics are we talking about? So these are the guys who will also provide us such information. And then, yes, we do collaborate with universities in the academia who are well-versed in terms of like data corroboration, visualizations, and so forth.
Terence, one of the challenges which the man on the street has and often wonders is how credible is data that the government is collected versus data that perhaps NGOs are collecting.
Yeah.
Have you seen a disparity between the numbers that you look at?
Yeah, I think a good researcher would not just consider hard data, but also to consider soft as well as sentiments on the ground, right? So we do, and we do realize some, for instance, say data collected just even the year pre-COVID would really look very different even like 6 months later. So what we do is, you know, we reflect this with sentiments on the ground, what NGOs are saying. So a lot of our stories are not just like pulling out numbers, but also interviewing people on the ground, finding what even people are commenting on social media, right, for a particular issue. And we mash them up together and then publicize it, publish it for the general man on the street, as you said.
Now, I want to zoom in on Wiki Impact's latest report, and I'm really excited to find out more about this. Bursa Malaysia's top 20. Who is the most charitable? Now, first of all, why did you publish this? And why do you think it's necessary to publish something like this?
Okay, so it's our attempt to understand trends and practices of corporate giving. So we really want to know, and how do we find this information through published annual reports, sustainability reports by these companies, right? So this is necessary for at least the inaugural year so that we can set a baseline and perhaps maybe even paint a vision, right, for companies in Malaysia to follow and maybe surpass that giving. I think in Malaysia, our current situation with the pandemic, inflation, price hikes, climate crisis, and so on, there is an urgent need for businesses, corporates to rethink their current business practices to continue sort of like creating not just value for stakeholders, Brian, but really like positive, long-lasting social and environmental impact in the sphere of their influence.
And for us as Biztech, sustainable philanthropy is something of a mantra. We really try to push this agenda forward. So perhaps, Terence, you can share some insights from the report itself and what stood out for you.
Yeah, so a couple of top-line insights would be, so I just need to do a disclaimer. These are not all companies. These are just top 20 most profitable companies in the stock exchange. As in highest net profit, not market cap. So based on these 20, what the top line numbers would be average. So we researched based on 3 broad categories, right? Cash giving, how much did they give in terms of cash, in-kind giving, how much did they give in terms of products or even their services, and then a number of man hours that their staff or their people volunteered, right? So in terms of cash giving, out of 20 companies, the average cash giving to net profit is about 0.29%, right? Then you have the highest one would be Sime Darby Berhad, based on our report, that was about 1.4, and Tenaga National, it's about slightly more than 1% of their profit, right? So the other one will be in-kind giving. So in-kind giving, it's a bit more subjective, right? And also, you know, I think we can talk about some of the challenges shortly, but it's not just necessarily monetary value, but you know, what they did. So for example, like a glove making company that donated gloves, right? And during the pandemic, and say they mentioned things like along the lines of X million ringgit worth of gloves. But this is, you know, what is it, like a retail value, or is it like, you know, manufacturing value? That's something that wasn't spelled out. Yeah. But based on the report that we got, this is slightly higher than 0.29. So it's so for example, Tenaga National, they gave like 3.22, right, of in-kind giving, and also Telecom, say 2.63. The hardest thing to quantify was the number of man hours that they actually volunteered, because out of that, only 7 out of 20 companies actually spelled out the number of volunteering hours. And the highest that we have would probably be CIMB Group, that was about 67 over 1,000 hours from their staff. Yeah.
So that's interesting, because here you're taking the top 20 companies.
That's right.
And there's quite a disparity in terms of how they are contributing.
Yeah.
How does this compare to other global benchmark or regional benchmarks? Did you ever do a benchmarking?
Okay, so we did, for sure. But that's also very interesting, because globally, not many countries, firstly, mandates that, secondly, have some sort of structure. So I would say even globally, obviously, like, you know, some of the countries I'll quote shortly, but globally, I think there's, in terms of structure framework, it's still not there in terms of like giving, right? Exactly spelled out. I would also be careful not to provide certain benchmark, because, like, you know, we don't have that range. Personally, I don't think giving should also be prescribed. In other words, like I want to tell you, minimum you need to give like X%. I don't think, because just like our personal giving, right? No one should also tell us how much to give. So, but based on our research, like for example, in the US in 2019, I believe, a pharmaceutical company, right? They were the highest cash giver, and they gave 2.9%, right? So that's well above 2.5%. The second company, which is a financial institution, gave 2.5%. So that's like way above the 2% mark of giving. Closer to home, say Asia, interestingly, India is the first country to make CSR giving mandatory and part of their statutory obligation. That's very interesting, right? So this was, I think, somewhere within 2014, right? They made an amendment to their Company Act, and a certain companies of a certain size and profitability have to spend 2% of their average net profit, right? Over the last X number of years. So you tend to hear the number 2%, you know, above 2%, right? I won't say it's a benchmark, but I guess that's something that we can refer to at least.
And I think that one of the key things is, if you look at global trends, and the trend is towards income inequality. It's not a Malaysian thing, it's a global phenomena. So one of the ways that perhaps a 2% number could help is really, particularly in a Malaysian context, impacting the B40, not only from just from a basic necessity standpoint, but also in terms of education and helping them get social mobility.
That's right. Yeah. So yeah, I think that is maybe the next stage of the research, to see, like, you know, what would that 2%, I'm just giving a number, even 1% for a matter, or 1.5% out of all the Bursa companies in Malaysia, right? How much would that amount be that perhaps, like as you say, right, to move the needle?
Yeah, because I think if everyone is only doing 0.2, 2 is too much. But perhaps an incremental step would be something that we should aspire to really redistribute philanthropy again, rather from a one-off, which many corporates do, and take the kids to McDonald's for the day or have a big party. But then the other 364 days in the year, they basically do nothing. This looks great, and it goes on an annual report that we did this. However, I think what people like Sign Derby and perhaps Tenaga National are doing is probably far more of a broader impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you are right. I think, Brian, one of the things that we feel corporate philanthropy should maybe consider doing is like going deep. I think going broad is good and okay, but I think going deep is really, I think we talked offline about this just now, but going deep into a certain category with measured outcomes, that'll be something that will be more beneficial to society at large.
And Terence, you also alluded to the various ways you can make impact. So as a corporation, there's cash outlay, there is also potentially in-kind outlays, and then also something that perhaps is sometimes discounted is volunteer hours, because a lot of times in the B40 and the marginalized groups, just good mentoring will really help move the needle. What are your thoughts on this?
No, absolutely. And that's why I said, right, out of the 20 companies, only sort of like 7 declared that the number of hours that they volunteer. So it's not just mentoring. I think mentoring would also move towards leadership. I think the whether is it the B40, the vulnerable, the marginalized communities would perhaps maybe require some sort of leadership in the areas where that they are trying to like come out from, and who to better provide. And I mean, community development is really a holistic kind of effort, right? So you have your teachers, you have your parents, your families, and so on. But also, I think the corporate really plays an important role in terms of being there for them in just different ways, mentoring, leadership, being there to coach them, and so on. Yeah.
So now you're just over 2 years old.
Yeah.
You and your team at Wiki Impact have made inspiring and impactful moves forward. What's in the agenda for the rest of 2022 and 2023?
I think for 2022, I think 2022, we are sort of like, trying to push out more stories, do more coverage. I think with the news that's happening in Malaysia right now, we're seeing how else we can be involved in terms of pushing the needle for poverty and so on. But also, like, this report, the Bursa Top 20 report, at least now we have some sort of baseline. And next year, when we do a research for the 2022 companies, top 2022 companies, let's see where those numbers are. Let's see whether data is available at the same time, whether the same 20 companies would be in the following year. These are some of the things that we intend to cover when it comes to the Bursa Top 20. Of course, we also have our another report called the Wiki Impact 100, which we cover 100 change makers, Malaysian change makers in our country, in different pillars of society, and that's something that we also want to push forward for next year. So the corporates, right, moving the needle in terms of corporate philanthropy, as well as the individual change makers who are in schools, in families, in communities.
Okay, so now, Terence, I'm going to ask you, if I'm a member of the general public, how can I help your cause?
Yeah, a couple of ways, Brian. Firstly, we are also driven by citizen volunteers. So if there are anyone out there who wish to be part of either contributing data or fact checking, right? I think that could be something that you could be involved in. Second would also be if you are interested to be part of the change makers, right? Come to our site, see our list, look at where you can contribute, find the needs. And I think lastly, if there are investors out there or people who want to get involved in data and research work, ping us, let us know. We do have a couple of projects that require some of this funding that to push forward like reports like the Bursa Top 20.
And also one of the key things is if I'm, ESG and CSR is now becoming top of the agenda for companies. They want to do good. Some of them don't know how to do good in a sustainable manner that we've talked about. How can they get help?
Yeah, you're talking about companies or individuals?
Yes, companies.
Right. So, talk to people on the ground. So like for us, we are sort of like one of those guys that you can approach and, we can provide advice / consultancy towards some of your efforts. We are happy to share with you our findings, what aligns with your vision, what aligns to your manifesto, right? That's something that we can come in and provide that support to. So I think it's important to really speak to people on the ground, those who have experience, look out for NGOs, change makers. I think the more people that we speak to, I think it gives us a sort of like different perspective to what's happening on the ground.
Terence, it's been a fascinating conversation, and it's also great to hear that there are organizations like you making a difference in people's lives. But before you leave, any final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with?
Yeah, so I think a quick final thought would be really, my encouragement is really for whether to you as a personal individual or to you as a corporate, right? Or maybe even a body or a movement, is really we need to go deep into people's lives and communities' lives. And I think especially from this point or from what we experienced the last 2.5 years is really the need of being there sustainably for whether an individual or whether a community. It's heightened, right? We need to do that. Like, you want friends who will stick by you throughout a difficult period, or you want a community would want somebody to journey alongside them. So I think if there's, one quick final point would really for us, for any contribution or any relationship that we're trying to build is to really go deep.
Now, Terence, thank you very much for taking your time to be on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you, Brian, for this opportunity. It's wonderful chatting with you.
Now, I'm Brian Fernandez, and we've been speaking to Terence Ooi, the co-founder of Wiki Impact, on Biztech's Community Conversation Show. This video and podcast will be on our social media platforms as well as our website, www.biztech.asia. It will also be on our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thank you very much for tuning in.